Chapter 6. Ash was sat in the head office of the Campanile UK organisation, which happened to be situated just south of the River Tyne in the city of Gateshead. He had headed off to see the head of the debt collection company John O'Toole worked for, but their offices were empty. By coincidence, they shared the building with another company that could be useful in the investigation. The imposing black building was partly occupied by Campanile UK and the debt collection company. Ash couldn't work out what the rest of it was. There was a reception and pretty much nothing else on show. The reception itself was manned by one person, who had her head down whilst on the phone. By the way her body language swayed, Ash assumed it was a personal call rather than a business one. People had much more fun on personal calls. He also assumed that if he could see her eyes, they would be lit up with the excitement of the conversation. Dull eyes just wouldn't go with that kind of happy, positive body language. She had seen him waiting, but not rang off the call, so he took a seat and waited for her to finish the conversation so he could approach. He had parked in a nearby public car park because the barriers for the office car park were firmly down, and there appeared to be a charge of £5 to enter. While he was sure he'd be able to talk his way out of the £5 charge, it felt like it was much easier to just park nearby and walk. He used the time to repeatedly call the debt collection company. 4 calls of no answer, then a 5th where someone answered his call, identified themselves, and then told him they were not in the office, busy. He arranged to call them later and find a mutual time to talk. The wind was kicking up, as it tended to do at that time of year, but aside from that it was dry and not too cold. At least it was warm enough for Ash not to have needed to scrape the ice off his windscreen earlier this morning. When he first learned to drive, it felt like he had to scrape the ice every morning, but now it was down to a few times a winter. Maybe the talk about global warming was true. As he sat there, he felt a presence at the back of his neck. Checking the reflection on the glass wall in front of him, he could see someone pull into the car park at the same barrier he had encountered. They had stopped and wound the passenger side window down to look at him rather than the driver's side window to negotiate the barrier. Ash had noticed when he pulled up that there was a keypad, so presumably there was a system whereby people could enter a number and gain access. The eyes burned hot on the back of his neck, and then they were gone. The driver turned the other way, the barrier opened, and he drove forwards. It was within the minute that the driver reappeared, walking past the back of Ash again before entering the reception area.
"Can I help you, my friend? We're not expecting any visitors today."
Ash stood up and flashed his badge. "I'm Detective Planter, and I'm here to speak to someone in the Campanile organisation. Can you help me?"
"I'm Pierre White, the head of the Campanile's UK business. Maybe you'd like to come upstairs and chat with me. Have you signed in?"
the man asked. Ash hadn't signed in. He hadn't been able to do anything because he had been ignored by the receptionist. "No, I haven't," he answered.
"Then, if you put your details in the visitor's book, it's procedure. I guess you know all about that," Pierre White said with a smile.
Ash warmed to his genuine nature. It felt very different to the person he thought was driving the car. Maybe it was a tough journey, and he needed a few moments to compose himself. Ash went through the formalities as the receptionist stayed on her call, trying to hide away from the other two as though they were interrupting something far more important than the business they were conducting.
"Let's go upstairs to somewhere more private. But before we do that, can I ask, Detective, why you are here?"
Pierre spoke quietly, and Ash had to concentrate fully on every word that was being said in order to piece together the sentence as a whole. "Shall we talk about that in private?" Ash replied, looking at the top of White's head, which was making the transition from dark to the same colour as his surname. Ash wondered 2 things. Firstly, how old the guy was, and secondly, when the same thing would happen to him. He had always said to friends that he didn't mind receding or going grey, but not both.
"I'd rather know what's going on,"
White insisted. It's about a murdered man we found in one of your hotels. Now can we go and talk somewhere? Ash replied. It was as though he'd punctured White's facade of pleasantry. The face dropped, the eyes intensified, and he headed towards the lift without another word. Ash decided that was his cue to follow. There were 2 lifts and 1 button. In Ash's mind, this meant only one thing. Guess which lift would arrive first. It was a game he had always played as a kid with his mum. It felt like he won pretty much all of the games he played with his mum at the time, but with hindsight he reckoned on a 50-50 split. The law of averages took care of that. Which lift do you think will come first? Ash asked Pierre White, both to entertain himself and an attempt to lighten the mood. What do you mean? White answered by way of a question, obviously still caught up in what he was going to say when the 2 of them arrived upstairs. I choose the left one. I think that will be the lift that gets here first. Do you want one on the right? Ash reverted to his childhood when in a situation like this. It made him feel happy, the times he got to spend with a mother who was going through her own problems, with a husband who wouldn't remain faithful. Okay, I choose the right one, White replied, with a glimmer in his eye, like he knew something the detective didn't. The right lift was the one that arrived first. Pierre smiled and ushered Ash into the lift before him, following him and pressing the button to floor 3. It was a narrow building, made all the more obvious when they arrived at the 3rd floor. A series of glass partitions showed the outer walls of the building. Take a seat. White gestured towards the first office and first pair of seats he could see. Ash was surprised that a company who operated around 20 hotels across the UK was run by an empty office. He and White were the only 2 bodies in the headquarters. Cuppa, Pierre White offered. Yes, that would be nice, thank you. Tea, no milk, no sugar, please. Ash replied with the same child in his voice as the lift game. It was always nice to be offered a drink, he decided. Just be a minute. I'll make it fresh with a kettle and a tea bag. We have a machine, but it's only switched on when someone walks in for the day, so it takes longer than a kettle to brew. Plus, it tastes like shit, White explained like he had nothing better to talk about. Returning about 2 minutes later with 2 teas, White placed them on the desk and was ready to talk. Is it the Washington Hotel? White inquired. Yes. So, there's been a body found in the room of one of our hotels. Why would that lead you to my door? He asked. Don't you have any worries like the welfare of your customers? Are your staff okay, or even is the hotel still making money? Ash asked, wondering how the guy could find out someone was discovered dead in one of his hotels and then be calm enough to ask if he wanted a cup of tea, and then to ask a question like that. Oh, yes, I'm concerned about that, but don't you have people closer to the crime to speak to? Anyway, is it one of our customers? Are the staff okay? Is the hotel open? No. Yes. I think so. No. What? The answers to your questions, in the order they were asked. No, I don't have people closer to the crime to talk to. We're a team, and we work on different elements before all coming together. Yes, it was one of your customers who is deceased. I think your staff are okay, but this will have come as a shock to many of them, particularly the maid who found the body. And no, your hotel is not open, unless you want to turn it into some kind of grisly tourist attraction, Ash detailed. He could see that White wouldn't have put the last suggestion totally out of mind if he thought there was a fast buck to be made from it. Okay, that's a lot of information to take in. So, how can I help? White asked, with a tone in his voice that indicated he felt the conversation as coming to an end. His volume increased too. I'm looking into some of the practices of the hotel chain. It looks like the deceased was murdered. I can't say anything more than that at the moment, but it also looks like the potential killer might have entered the building without passing through reception. At least, that's what the preliminary scan of the CCTV images suggests. So, I suppose I'm asking you how a killer might enter the building without using the main entrance. Ash invited White to talk, but It wasn't forthcoming. He waited for another 30 seconds. There was no sign of an answer. He stared at White, who looked like he could wait all day, and wasn't searching inside his head for a response. How about I ask the question in a slightly different way? If you wanted to go inside your hotel at Washington and kill someone without being seen, what would you do? How would you go about it? Ash questioned in a way that he knew Augustine wouldn't appreciate, but he didn't suspect White for 1 second and wanted to get information and leave. If this was a suspect, then he might have played the long game. Plus, he didn't much fancy driving back up the Felling bypass in anything like traffic. Are you accusing me of murder? Because if you are, I'm sure I could find plenty of people who could vouch for my whereabouts last night. Not at all. I'm trying to find out how a murderer could get in and out of your hotel without the reception staff even knowing they were there. Let me remind you, it took a maid to go in and clean the room up for the body to be found. How about you have a good, long think about the answer to my question? I'll finish up this cup of tea while you mull it over. Thanks for the cuppa. Ash raised his cup at the end of speaking, as though he was raising a round of cheers for an act of celebration. He looked down, deep into the teacup, seeing through the brown liquid to what looked like an etching at the bottom of the cup. It was too hot to drink all in one go, but he kept the cup to his lips and tried to work out the message. As he supped more, he could see the message becoming clear. While there is tea, there is hope. Arthur Wing Pinheiro. An apt message as far as he was concerned at that point in time. He finished off the very last drop and looked up at Pierre White, who looked more determined than when he last clasped eyes on him. He looked deep into the eyes of steel, hoping to find the power to melt it. All he had come to do was get some information, and it felt like the managing director of the UK operation of this global brand had already closed the door to that information and thrown away the key. I suppose anyone with an employee pass could get in and out of the building pretty efficiently. Had you thought about that? White offered. Ash wondered if it was his conciseness that had allowed him to rise to the head of this organisation, or whether it was his French first name. Either way, he could see the guy working his way up rather quickly and not getting his hands dirty on the way. And how many of these are out there? Do you guys here at head office hand them out? Ash spoke, as he gestured around the empty offices. They were as hollow as the answers he was being given by Pierre. We do give out some master passes to people who need to visit multiple hotels. These might include global leadership, maintenance contractors and stock takers. White responded, as though he was reading from the employee handbook. Textbook answers always frustrated Ash. He knew at school when someone in his class just learned the words on a page, rather than the meaning behind those words. Reading from the page meant one thing as far as Ash was concerned: a trained memory. Even though an image paints 1,000 words, the words mattered. Every single one of them. That's why school tests were based on writing down answers rather than taking photographs. And do you have an inventory of active passes? Ash decided to fight formality with formality. He imagined that these were words in the employee handbook too. Yes, we certainly do. It's on file. I'll check it out now. Do you want an electronic or printed version? Can I have both, please? Here's my card. It has my email address on. As Pierre White got up and took the business card, Ash felt like he was at a networking event, swapping business cards with others, pressing the flesh, feeling lost and lonely. He had been pushed by Marie to start making connections in the business community. This was particularly prevalent in the winter months when there wasn't quite as much crime. So, Ash got himself to some networking events. He spoke to business leaders and found out their true fears about crime. It all boiled down to two things: their profits and their personal safety. There were the odd one or two that wanted the best for their employees, but most were more interested in whether crime in the town would affect the flow of money into their organisation. Ash recalled one such encounter from a networking event at the Business and Innovation Centre, known as the BIC, near the River Wear in Sunderland. Hi there. My name is Ash and I work for the police in Washington, keeping the streets safe for your business. He had been told that he needed a tagline, a way of being remembered. That was as close as Ash could muster without feeling even more self-conscious. Hi Ash, I'm David, and I build websites for a living. Ash had noticed an inordinate number of web developers at these kind of events. Not that they all identified as a web developer. They went by all manner of self-given titles. Full-service digital marketing agency, digital marketing guru, web designer extraordinaire, Magento developer. Ash had learned to translate all of these into one, someone who builds websites. He had even bumped into someone at a networking event who introduced themselves as someone who made millionaires. That sounded different. When he asked what that meant, he soon found out that they built websites. I was wondering what the biggest concerns you have for your business are at the moment. Ash went straight in for the killer question. He found it cut out a lot of waffle. Of course, every web designer wanted to pick up a big client. They had a florist, an estate agent, and a handful of sole traders. But they all wanted to build a website for a big organization. The police would be a massive feather in their hat. Ash learned the hard way that he would be pressed for a contact in the marketing department. He also learned to bypass that by asking the killer question. Well, when people are fearful, they are less likely to open their purse strings, and that's not good for me, David answered. A common reply. Ash was ready to go back to small talk, the kind that 90% of business networking was built on, when David offered something else. Of course, there are businesses that do really well when crime rises. In fact, I've got a couple of those on my books, so I'm not that bothered whether crime goes up or down, really. Ash was astonished at the answer. No love for his fellow man or anything like that, just whether he can make some cash out of the situation. Ash wasn't naive enough to think that businesses were charities, but he did believe that everyone wanted society to get better. Well, he did until that conversation. Back in the room, Ash heard the click of the keyboard as White got the information he needed. But he could hear another sound going along with it, the voice of White into his mobile phone. Throughout their time together, the volume in Pierre White's voice had increased. Now it was almost at fever pitch. Ash tried to pick out words in the conversation. Pierre White was too far away for Ash to hear everything, but he had picked up a technique where he could detect certain words and piece together the rest. It was the longer words that he could distinguish, as they took more effort to deliver. Words such as the gave nothing away, and words like a could be delivered in a grunt. But words such as fucking and murder took more facial contortions and carried more emotion. They were the ones Ash was identifying. Fucking whether I should... Killed. Washington. Last night. Fucking knowing. Murder. Detective. Hopefully. Later. Idiot. Ash couldn't piece together a full picture of what was said, but he knew that Pierre White was speaking to someone about what was going on. No crime there. He hadn't been asked to keep quiet about anything. But it obviously preyed on his mind more than he let Ash know. The conversation continued under the whir of a printer, probably something a good few years old, as it made one hell of a racket. Ash stopped trying to listen in, and hoped there would be some more conversation he could decipher after the printing had stopped. But by the time the printer had finished its task and ground to a silent halt, the phone conversation had done the same thing. At the same time, Ash looked around the room. He wasn't so much looking for clues to the murder as looking for clues of what the Campanile head office did. It looked like an empty office to all intents and purposes, and had the feeling that it would be a dull place to work, even if anyone did walk through the front door. A sea of grey. Only one flash of black and white in the far corner. White walked back over to Ash with the confidence in his stride that the detective would be on his way. I think this is what you are looking for. I've also emailed a PDF to your email address. Is there anything else, Detective? This is a good start, thank you. I may have more questions when I get through all of this, But for now, that's just what I need. Good, White replied. He started to walk towards the lifts without sitting down on his journey from the printer. Ash got up and followed. He suspected that the man would let his guard down a little when he thought it was all over. That was the moment Ash had been waiting for. So, how long have you worked for the company? Feels like all my life has been dedicated to Campanile. And you say that like it's not a good thing, Ash responded, as he detected a smidgen of regret in the reply. We all have our crosses to bear. It's not the company, it's the position. When I worked in the lower levels of the business, I could just come in and do my thing. But now I have to look after the reputation of the business. Global leadership in France put a lot of pressure on us to get results. It's my job to do anything necessary to ensure those results keep on coming. The share price depends on it, White explained, with more honesty than he had displayed in all the rest of their time together. And does that mean absolutely anything? Ash asked, hoping the honesty would continue. But all it did was prick Pierre out of his frankness and back to the straight-bat man he had been for the rest of the conversation. Now, there are lines that any man won't cross. Ash looked him up and down, and then gestured his head towards the lifts and back out of the building. He wanted to get back for the team briefing, and then to get to work on the list of names he had. So, what is the prize? Pierre White asked Ash, as they walked out of the office together towards the lifts. The prize for what? Guessing which lift would come first. Ash turned, facing the man who he felt had answered all of his questions and answered none of them at the same time. He was looking for a crack in the veneer of control. No crack was present. Oh, just the satisfaction that you have won. That until the next round. We play again every time we are faced with a similar situation. Oh, I like that feeling, White replied, with a smugness that Ash hadn't felt in some time. As Ash left, he noticed the out-of-order sign on the lift that he had chosen earlier. He hoped that Pierre White didn't have any more inside knowledge that he had kept hidden.